What if the letter never arrives? What if the raven carries a different message, or no message at all, and the boy with the gray eyes and the heavy sword arm simply stays? What if the single decision that seemed so small, a father's quiet word in a cold room, a son's reluctant nod, becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? Ned Stark is not a man who speaks without weight. Every word he has ever offered has carried the full gravity of his name, his house, his sense of what is right. So when he calls Jon to his solar on a gray morning in late autumn, when the fire is burning low and the hounds have been sent from the room, the boy understands before the first sentence is finished that something has shifted beneath the floor of ordinary life. Jon stands the way he always stands, straight, controlled, hands loose at his sides, the posture of someone who has spent years learning to take up precisely the right amount of space, never more. Ned watches him. He has always watched him carefully, the way a man watches something precious that he knows he holds imperfectly. There is a cost to that watching, written faintly in the lines around Ned's eyes. The words come slowly, the way important words always do when the man speaking them has rehearsed them many times and still finds them difficult. Ned does not speak of the wall directly, not at first. He speaks of darkness, a word he uses with the precision of someone who means it literally. He speaks of what moves beyond the wall's shadow, of what the Rangers have reported, of what he himself suspects after years of reading dispatches that the Southern Lords dismiss as the raving of cold men. He says that sending a sword to meet that darkness is not cowardice. He says that keeping a sword close, a sword he trusts, may be the wiser strategy. He does not finish the thought completely. He does not need to. Jon is silent for a long moment. The fire pops. Outside, the wind moves through Winterfell's high towers with a sound like distant breathing. The Night's Watch has been, in Jon's mind, the only answer to the question of what he is. It has been the place where his parentage would not follow him, where a bastard's gray cloak would look the same as any other man's. He has rehearsed the departure 100 times in his sleep. The gates opening, the horse beneath him, the cold air, the beginning of something that felt like resolution. And now Ned is offering him a different resolution, one that requires him to stay exactly where the question of what he is has always been loudest. Ned says one more thing then, quietly, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He says that Catelyn has come, in her way, to a different understanding. Not warmth. He does not pretend warmth, but recognition. Jon would be named a Ward of Winterfell in formal terms. He would carry rights and responsibilities. He would have standing. Something in Jon's chest moves, like a key turning in a lock that has been rusted shut for years. He agrees. Not with relief exactly, and not without grief for the other life he is setting down. He agrees the way soldiers agree to difficult postings, with full understanding of the cost and a deliberate choice to pay it. Ned places a hand on his shoulder, and neither of them speaks for a moment, and the fire burns a little higher. The solar's door is thick oak, old and warped slightly in its frame, and it does not close as completely as it should. This is a detail that has never mattered before. It matters now. Sansa has come to find her father to ask about something ordinary. A question about the feast preparations, a rider expected from the twins, something with no weight at all. She has not come to listen. She is not, by nature, a girl who lurks in corridors, but she pauses outside the door because she hears her own name spoken, quietly, in her father's voice, and stillness takes her before she can decide whether to walk away. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. She hears her father speak of trust. She hears Jon's silence and the quality of it. Not the silence of someone dismissed or uncertain, but the silence of someone being asked to carry something real. She hears the word ward spoken with the full weight Ned gives to words. She moves away before the door opens. She is careful about that. But the portrait she has carried of Jon Snow, the slight figure at the edges of family gatherings, the name spoken with discomfort, the shadow that Winterfell absorbed without ever quite welcoming, that portrait is already changing at its edges, the lines softening and redrawing into something she does not yet have a name for. She finds herself at the top of the great staircase when Jon emerges below, crossing the yard toward the training grounds with that same controlled stride. She watches him for longer than she intends to. He does not look up. He has no reason to think anyone is watching. He has never had much reason to think that, but the world has just shifted by precisely 1 degree, and 1 degree held long enough becomes a completely different direction. The yard fills early now. That is the first change anyone notices, the first tangible rearrangement of Winterfell's daily rhythms, where before the training ground held its predictable morning population, Robb, Ser Roderick, whatever household guards were not yet occupied with duties. There is now a second figure arriving before the gates have properly opened to the day, before the kitchens have finished their first hour of work. Jon is there when Robb arrives. He is already there, and Robb, to his credit, does not make a ceremony of it. He simply picks up a sparring sword and crosses the yard, and they begin, as though this is something they have always done, as though no version of events ever existed in which Jon was elsewhere. Ser Roderick watches this for 3 days before he says anything. He is a man who has spent decades studying young men with weapons in their hands, and he knows the difference between sparring and communication. What Robb and Jon are doing in that yard is both. They fight through things. There is something being settled between them that has nothing to do with who scores the clean touch, and Ser Roderick, who has navigated the politics of this household with the careful neutrality of a man who serves the Lord and not the lady, understands this. By the 4th day, he is calling on Jon to demonstrate footwork for the younger children. By the end of the 1st week, he has given him a standing role in the afternoon drills. Nothing is announced. Nothing needs to be. Winterfell runs on precedent, and precedent is simply what happens twice. Bran is delighted by this development in the way only a boy his age can be, openly, completely, without any interest in what it might mean. Arya is more complicated. She has always occupied her own strange territory in the household, too sharp for the roles set out for her, too restless to find peace in the ones she could carve for herself. But Jon has always spoken to her as though her restlessness were entirely reasonable, and so she accepts his presence in the drills with something approaching approval, which from Arya has always been worth more than praise from anyone else. Ned does not explain his decision about the Great Hall table to Catelyn directly. He makes the arrangement, and it stands. There is a seat, positioned with deliberate care, not above the younger children, but not below the household knights either. And Jon takes it that first evening with the controlled stillness of someone who has decided not to assign too much significance to a chair. He eats. He answers when spoken to. He does not press his luck. Catelyn sits at the far end of the high table, and her expression is what it has always been on matters concerning Jon Snow: tightly managed, precisely neutral. A face that has learned to carry its objections silently because it has calculated correctly that Ned will not bend on this. She has never been able to protest aloud. What she feels is another matter entirely, and that is her business alone. The servants begin to adjust. This is its own kind of confirmation. Winterfell's staff has its own language of acknowledgement. Who receives a fire lit before dawn? Whose clothes are taken without being asked? Who gets the deferential bend of the neck from the gate guards? These things do not arrive all at once, but they come, one small gesture after another, and each one quietly extends to Jon some portion of the regard that the household has always given to Robb. It costs the servants nothing and risks nothing, and they are practical people. They see which way the current runs. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing, because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Sansa comes to the training yard on a Wednesday. She comes, she would tell herself, because Bran has been talking about a new grip technique, and she is curious to see it, which is not entirely untrue. She finds a position along the low stone wall that faces the yard, and she watches. Arya is sparring with a training sword against one of the older boys and making him work for every exchange. Bran is listening to Ser Roderick. With the focused expression, he saves for things that genuinely interest him. And Jon is at the far end of the yard, demonstrating something precise and patient to a pair of younger boys who cannot be more than 9, walking them through the same sequence with adjustments so small and specific that Sansa, who has no particular education in swordsmanship, can still see that he is good at this, that he is calm and precise and does not lose patience when the boys fumble the sequence for the 3rd time. He notices her after a few minutes. She sees the moment he does. Not a start, not a look, quickly looked away, but a brief acknowledgement, a pause, and then he continues what he is doing. When he eventually walks her way, it is because the session is ending and her direction is simply where the gate is. He stops a few feet short of her. She says she came to watch Bran. He says Bran is improving. There's a pause in which both of them understand this is not the interesting part of the conversation. She asks if he prefers teaching or training himself, and it is such a genuinely curious question that something in his expression shifts, something quiet opening that was not open before. He considers it seriously because he considers questions seriously. He tells her he has not decided yet, that he thinks they might ask different things of a person, that he has been thinking about the difference. She looks at him directly then. It is the look she gave the staircase 3 days ago, the one that followed him across the yard before she caught herself. He has just said something more honest than she expected, and honesty in Winterfell, real honesty, not performed nobility, is not always easy to come by. He does not fill the silence that follows, neither does she. The banners arrive before the king does. That is always how it works with Robert Baratheon. The noise of him precedes him, the flags and the horns, and the outriders kicking mud along the king's road. The whole churning apparatus of a court that has grown fat and complicated in the years since the rebellion. Winterfell has been quiet for a long time. Now it will not be. Jon watches from the walls as the column crests the distance and becomes real. He has heard of King Robert his entire life, the man who swung the hammer, who broke the Targaryens, who sits the throne that was won in blood and does not always seem entirely comfortable sitting it. What arrives on the road below is something more complicated than a legend. What arrives is a man grown heavy, flushed at the cheeks, laughing at something one of his riders has said. a laugh that carries all the way up the stone where Jon stands. There is something in that laugh that is not quite joy, something that has learned to perform itself so well it has almost forgotten the difference. Ned Stark descends to greet him. His children line the yard. Jon takes his place at the edge of the formation, neither pushed forward nor standing back, present, watching, calculating without quite knowing yet that calculating is what he is doing. The king embraces Ned with a force that suggests he means it. There are queens and knights, and a young prince who holds himself like he's been told repeatedly how important he is, and has begun to believe it without question. Joffrey Baratheon finds Sansa almost immediately. This is not surprising. Sansa is exactly the kind of beautiful that a prince of his particular vanity notices. Graceful, composed, lit up with the careful brightness of a girl who has been taught that impression is a form of currency. He approaches her in the yard with the practiced ease of someone who expects to be welcomed. He says something that is almost charming. She responds with courtesy because she has been raised toward courtesy the way some children are raised toward archery, with repetition and intention and a deep internalized understanding that the form matters. Jon is nearby. He is always nearby now, in a way that does not announce itself. He does not insert himself. He simply exists in proximity, one hand resting loosely at his side, his posture easy, his eyes moving. When Joffrey's attention extends a little too long, when his tone tips slightly from admiration into assumption, Jon says something low and even, a question ostensibly about the journey, a perfectly ordinary question that happens to redirect the current of the exchange with the precision of someone who has learned that the loudest intervention is rarely the most effective one. Joffrey glances at him, reassesses, moves on in the way that small arrogances do when they meet resistance they cannot easily categorize. Sansa does not look at Jon afterward. She is too well trained for that. But the tension along her shoulders releases by a fraction, and she stands a little more easily in the conversation that follows. And that fraction is not lost on anyone who is paying close attention. The solar comes later. Ned and Robert behind closed doors, voices dropping to registers that mean the thing being discussed is real and heavy and not for the hall. Jon is not in the room, but he has been asked to wait outside it, and so he hears the shape of what passes even through stone and oak. The pressure of a request that is not quite a request. The weight of an obligation dressed in the language of honor. The king needs his hand. The realm needs Ned Stark. These are the reasons given, and they are not entirely false, which is what makes them effective. When Ned emerges, his face has the quality of a man who has already made his decision and is now carrying it somewhere private to examine what it costs. He finds Jon in the corridor. He looks at him for a moment, the way men look at things they are about to trust with something heavy. What he says is not long. He says Robb will one day be Lord of Winterfell, and that this is as it should be, that the name and the seat and the responsibility of governing belong to his true-born heir, and Jon has never needed that explained and never will. But then he says something else. He says that every wall needs a foundation that does not shift. He says that what he is asking is not a lesser thing. He says that if the worst should come, and he does not finish that sentence in so many words, because he does not need to. He needs to know that someone stands behind his children who will not be moved by politics or pressure, or the kind of fear that makes men negotiate when they should hold firm. Jon listens without moving. Ned tells him to keep Bran from the highest towers. He tells him to watch Arya, who watches everything and can be trusted to find trouble with extraordinary consistency. He tells him, and here his voice drops to something quieter, to be mindful of Sansa, who has a good mind and a generous heart, and who will need both in the years ahead. Jon says he understands. Ned looks at him once more. Whatever he sees there settles something in him. He walks back toward the great hall, and the preparations for departure have already begun, and the yard is full of noise and motion, and the business of a court that does not stay anywhere long. Jon stands in the corridor a moment longer, the words still finding their weight in him, and through the narrow window at the end of the hall, he can see torchlight beginning to move across the courtyard, and Sansa moving through it, slow and deliberate, her face turned slightly upward toward the dark, as though she is trying to read something written there that is not finished being written yet. The ravens come south before the cold does, which is unusual. Winter moves from north to south, everyone knows this, but the news moves faster than weather and arrives at Winterfell with its feathers still damp and its small dark eyes full of nothing, because ravens carry no understanding of what they carry. That understanding belongs to the ones who break the seals. Ned Stark reaches King's Landing on a gray afternoon in late autumn, and the city receives him the way cities always receive northerners, with noise and smell, and the vague hostility of a place that has decided it is the center of all things and resents any reminder that the world extends beyond its walls. The Red Keep rises above the bay like something that has been waiting. Ned looks at it from the dock and does not allow himself to feel what a man might feel arriving somewhere he did not want to go, to serve a king he loves, but does not entirely trust in a city he has never liked. He is the hand of the king. There is work. What he finds in the work is what he feared he might find. The ledgers do not lie, or rather, they lie in ways that are legible to a man who knows what to look for. The crown is drowning in debt, half of it owed to houses that smile at court dinners and watch him from across rooms with calculating patience. Robert feasts and hunts and laughs his large consuming laugh, and does not appear to notice that the ground beneath the throne has been quietly replaced with something that will not hold weight. Ned notices. Ned begins to ask questions with the careful, methodical precision of a man who understands that certain questions, asked too quickly, become last questions. But there is a difference this time in how he moves through the capital's shadows. Back in the world as it was, the Lannisters held his daughter, held Sansa with her direwolf dead, and her loyalty to a golden boy not yet entirely undone. And that leash was real, and Ned felt it every hour. Here there is no leash. Sansa is in Winterfell. She is safe. The Lannisters know she is safe and cannot touch her, and so the architecture of pressure they might otherwise have constructed around Ned Stark simply has no foundation. He is still cautious. He is always cautious. The North breeds a particular relationship with caution. But the caution now serves strategy rather than survival, and these are different things. He moves more slowly. He trusts fewer people. He does not place his hand on the table until he is certain of what the table is made of. At Winterfell, Jon reads the ravens aloud. This is how it becomes practice. The three of them in the solar, firelight doing its work against the dark outside, and Jon's voice in the middle of it, steady and unhurried, reading their father's words, as though each sentence is ground that must be tested before weight is placed upon it. Robb sits with his elbows on his knees, leaning forward, listening the way he listens to everything, openly, directly, with the uncomplicated attentiveness of someone who does not yet know that openness can be exploited. Sansa sits slightly apart, her hands still in her lap, and listens in a way that is not the same way at all. The news is not good. Robert is unwell in ways that the letters describe obliquely. Their father is a man who chooses his words with care when he suspects they might be intercepted, which they might always be. But the obliqueness itself communicates. The king's health is uncertain. The king's court is not behaving as a court should behave around a king whose health is uncertain. There are factions. There are alliances hardening at the edges. There is, beneath everything, the particular quality of stillness that precedes a shift in power. Not peace, but preparation. Robb says that perhaps they should be sending men south. Jon considers this. Sansa says nothing immediately, and then says quietly that men moving south would be seen, and being seen would change what people did, and they could not yet know what changes they could afford. Robb looks at her. She does not look away. Jon does not look at either of them, but something in him settles like stone settling into earth. They are not a council in any formal sense. There is no title for what they are, but they meet in the solar when ravens arrive, and they speak honestly and without performance, and between the three of them, they are beginning to construct something. An understanding, a posture, a shared sense of what matters and what does not, that none of them yet has language for. Sansa writes to Ned. She writes with care, the way she does everything now, choosing words that carry more than they display. She tells him she misses him. She tells him the castle is well. And then, in the middle of a sentence about the first snow on the northern hills, she tells him to come home. Not as a plea, but as a conclusion, as though she has examined all possibilities and found that this one is correct. The letter is sealed before Jon asks to add a postscript, and she breaks the seal herself and slides the parchment across the table to him without a word. He writes only a few lines. He adds his name beneath hers. Ned reads the letter by candlelight in his chambers in the Red Keep, the sounds of King's Landing filtering through the shuttered window, and something moves through him that is not grief and is not quite joy, but lives in the space between them. He reads it twice. He sets it down on the table beside the ledgers, beside the questions without answers, beside everything that is wrong with the world as it is arranged. He picks it up and reads it once more. He is still holding it when the door opens without a knock, and Littlefinger stands in the frame with a smile that has no warmth in it, and eyes that have already finished calculating something Ned has not yet begun to consider. The raven arrives before dawn. It comes not bearing the measured, formal language of court, not the careful phrasing of a Lannister announcement dressed in the colors of authority, but in the cramped, terrified hand of a steward named Vian Poole, a man who has served the Starks long enough to know that what he is writing will break something that cannot be repaired. The parchment is barely legible in places, pressed too hard where his hand shook, the ink blurred in one corner as though water touched it, or something else. It reaches Master Luwin in the gray pre-morning, and Luwin reads it, standing at his table with a candle held close, and he reads it again, and then he stands very still for a long moment before he does what must be done. Robb hears it first. He is the eldest, and the weight of it is delivered to him because it must be delivered to someone capable of standing beneath it, even if only barely. He stands in the great hall with the candle still guttering from where Luwin set it on the table, and he reads the words, and the words do not change. Lord Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, Hand of the King, husband, father, the axis around which all of Winterfell has always turned, is dead. executed on the steps of the great sept of Baelor on the order of a boy king and the hand of a lion. The raven does not soften it. Vion Poole was not writing to soften anything. He was writing to warn. Robb does not cry. The grief moves through him like something tectonic, something too large for the surface of a face. It goes deeper than that, folds inward, and what emerges on the other side is not sorrow, but a cold and absolute clarity. He calls for Jon before he calls for anyone else. Jon arrives already awake, already half-dressed, as though some part of him has known the shape of this morning before it arrived. He reads the letter in silence. He hands it back. He says nothing for a long time, and Robb says nothing. And between them, the silence holds the full weight of the man they have both lost. The man who taught them the same lessons through different hands, who looked at each of them and saw something worth shaping. Jon's jaw tightens. His hands, resting on the table, press flat against the wood as if steadying something. Then Robb says, "Call the banners." And Jon says, "Yes." There is no debate. There is no council convened in the night to weigh the risks against the merits. No careful political negotiation with the facts. Robb Stark is 20 years old, and his father's blood is on the steps of a southern sept, and every lord in the north will hear that Robb Stark called his banners with his brothers standing beside him. Not a brother about to take the black, not a brother departing for a frozen wall at the edge of the world, but a brother fully present, fully committed, his sword sworn to the same cause, and his name already half woven into the northern nobility through his betrothal to Sansa. The lords who ride in to answer the call see it immediately. Two sons of Winterfell standing side by side in the gray courtyard with the dire wolves at their heels. It means something that no single heir standing alone could convey. It means the Starks are not broken. It means the Starks intend to answer. But that comes later. In the hours between the raven and the dawn, before the castle has fully woken to what has arrived in the night, Sansa learns what has happened. She learns it not from Luwin, not from Robb, but from the castle itself. From the way sound moves differently through Winterfell when something has gone wrong at its core. From the low voices and the hurried footsteps and the quality of silence that lives inside rooms where people are trying not to be heard. She dresses alone. She does not call for her handmaid. She walks through the castle in the dark with the knowledge spreading through her the way cold spreads, from the outside in, slowly, until it reaches somewhere central and vital, and the body understands that warmth was never promised. She goes to the Godswood. She goes because it is the only place in Winterfell that has never asked anything of her, the only place that does not require her to be any particular version of herself. She sits beneath the heart tree with its ancient carved face and its white bark luminous in the pre-dawn gray, and she does not pray exactly, and she does not weep exactly, but she sits with the truth of it, the way one sits with something that cannot be put down and cannot be carried, simply present with the weight, waiting for the body to adjust to what the mind already knows. Jon finds her there. He does not ask how she is. He does not offer comfort in the form of words, because words are not what this moment requires, and some part of him understands that with a precision that surprises even him. He sits beside her beneath the heart tree, close enough that their shoulders nearly touch, and the Godswood holds them both in its strange, deep quiet. They stay like that for a long time. The sky begins to shift. Not yet light, but no longer fully dark, that threshold hour that belongs to neither. Sansa's breathing slows. Jon stares at the carved face in the tree, the eyes that have watched this family for centuries, and something moves through him that he cannot name and does not try to. When Sansa finally speaks, her voice is steady. She says, "He knew it was dangerous, and he stayed." Jon turns to look at her. She is not asking for an explanation. She is not seeking comfort or absolution. She is working something out, examining the architecture of her father's choices, the way someone examines a structure after it has fallen, trying to understand what it was built from, whether it held as long as it could have. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her eyes are dry in the way that comes after something has already passed through. Jon says, he stayed because he thought the truth was enough. Sansa is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "It wasn't." "No," Jon says, "it wasn't." And that is the whole of it. The full weight of what Ned Stark believed and what the world proved him wrong about, compressed into 4 words between 2 people sitting under an ancient tree while the North begins to gather itself for war. Something passes between them in the saying of it, in the shared understanding that they are both the children of a man who believed in honor as a load-bearing structure and died when the structure proved insufficient, and that they are now in a world that will require them to be something more calculated than that. Not less good, perhaps, but more careful, more strategic, more aware of the gap between what should be true and what is. The sky continues to shift. Somewhere in the castle, a horn sounds once, low and long, the beginning of the call that will echo across every holdfast and hall in the north. Robb is already moving. Jon rises first. He offers his hand to Sansa, and she takes it. And when she stands, they are standing very close together in the Godswood, with the heart tree at their backs and the whole of the north awakening around them, and neither of them lets go of the other's hand immediately. It is only a moment, brief, unremarkable to any eye that might observe it. But it lands in both of them with the weight of something decided, something that has shifted from possibility into fact, without either of them having chosen the exact moment of its changing. Then Jon releases her hand and turns toward the castle. They walk back through the Godswood together, side by side, and the dead leaves crunch softly beneath their feet, and by the time they reach the gate, the first riders are already visible on the road from the east. The first answer to the call, banners gray and white against the pale morning sky, coming fast. The riders come in waves after that, for days upon days, until the roads feeding into Winterfell are thick with men and horses and the sound of boots on frozen ground. The northern host assembles with the grim efficiency of a people who have not forgotten what war asks of them. Even in long years of peace, lords come with their bannermen, knights come with their retinues, and the common men come with whatever they have: axes, hunting bows, old swords handed down from fathers who carried them somewhere cold and terrible and came back changed. They fill the yards and overflow into the fields, and the castle breathes with the weight of them. Its halls loud with voices speaking of routes and provisions and the long southern road. Jon rides out 3 days before Robb, taking the vanguard south with a column of 2,000 men, cavalry at the front, infantry threaded through the middle, supply wagons guarded close at the rear. It is a small force by the standards of what is coming, but it is sharp, deliberately chosen, and Jon moves it with a precision that draws notice from men who expected to feel impatient under a bastard's command. He does not order where he can suggest. He does not speak where silence will serve, but when he speaks, it lands with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent years turning problems over in his mind before arriving at solutions. And the men around him recognize that quality the way a soldier recognizes a good blade, not by its decoration, but by its weight and its edge. Lord Grayton Umber, who had come to the vanguard expecting to chafe beneath whatever yoke the boy would try to lay across his neck, rides beside Jon on the third day and says nothing for a long stretch of road. Then he says, simply, that Jon rides like Ned. It is not a question. Jon keeps his eyes on the road ahead and says that he had a good teacher. The Great Jon grunts once, which is, from him, as close to reverence as most men ever hear. Robb marches south a few days behind with the main host, and the two columns communicate through riders who know every shortcut in the northern hills. The strategy takes shape in the space between them. Robb the hammer, Jon the tip of the blade, and the Lannisters somewhere to the south, calculating odds that have begun to shift in ways they have not yet noticed. The absence of Sansa in King's Landing is a wound in the Lannister position that they have not yet realized they are bleeding from. In the history that did not happen, she was leverage, a girl in a golden cage whose existence made every Stark decision slightly more cautious, every Stark demand slightly more restrained. Robb, in that other history, could not push too hard without risking his sister. Here, there is no such break upon him. His family is whole. His leverage points are his own. When he negotiates as a man who holds his own cards, and no one else holds the ones he cannot afford to lose. The Lannisters feel this difference without being able to name it precisely. Their letters to one another, passed between Cersei and Tywin and the small council, circle around the peculiar steadiness of the Stark position, its unusual lack of desperation. Tywin Lannister does not make the mistake of underestimating it for long. He is old enough and cold enough to recognize a changed board when he is sitting at it. He begins to adjust. And at Winterfell, 600 miles north, Sansa Stark is learning what she is made of. It does not happen all at once. It begins in small rooms, with small decisions, a dispute between two lesser lords over grazing rights along the Flint's Finger that Catelyn, who has ridden south to be near Robb, has delegated to her eldest daughter in a letter that perhaps underestimated how capably that daughter would handle it. Sansa reads the letter twice. Then she summons the steward and the maester and asks them each separately to explain the history of the dispute, because she has learned that people reveal their own loyalties in how they explain other people's grievances. She listens. She weighs. She makes a decision that neither lord loves completely, but that both lords can accept, which is, as her father once told her, the only kind of peace that holds. Word passes through the castle quietly, the way consequential things often do. Not announced, but noticed. The Lady Sansa knows what she is doing. The Lady Sansa should be consulted. The Lady Sansa's judgment, when she gives it, does not waver. She writes to Jon every week, as she promised. The first letters are careful and formal, full of reports. The grain stores, the dispute, the state of the roads, a family of small folk who came to the gate needing shelter and were given it. Jon reads them by firelight in his tent and writes back in the same register, clear and practical. Information traded for information. But the letters lengthen, week by week. They begin to carry something else beneath the practical surface. Small observations about the cold of the castle at night, about the sound the heart tree makes in high wind, about a memory of some shared moment that seems to have surfaced in one of them, without announcement, and been set down on the page almost before they realized they were writing it. Jon's fourth letter ends mid-thought. Or rather, it ends where the thought became something he was not yet prepared to send, and he had stopped his pen there and folded the parchment anyway and given it to the rider before he could reconsider. He does not know if Sansa will notice the incompleteness of it. He suspects that she will. She notices everything now, it seems, in ways she perhaps did not before, or perhaps always did, and simply had no arena in which to demonstrate it. Her reply arrives on a cold gray morning when the host is camped in the hills south of the Neck, 2 days from a crossing that Robb and his captains have been debating for the better part of a week. Jon is standing outside his tent when the rider comes, and he reads Sansa's letter standing there in the cold, with his breath misting around him and the sound of the camp all around. And he reads it twice, and then he folds it carefully and puts it inside his cloak, close to his chest where the warmth is, and he walks back into the tent where Robb is leaning over a table spread with maps. And Robb looks up and sees something in Jon's face that he does not comment on directly, because Robb has learned when to ask and when to simply wait. She says the ford at the eastern bend will be passable by the week's end, Jon says, his finger coming down on the map. A party of her father's men used it the autumn before last. She found it in the household records. Robb stares at him, then at the map. Then he looks back up and says nothing for a moment that stretches long enough to carry meaning. She found it in the records, he repeats. She keeps thorough records, Jon says, and his voice is careful and steady and reveals almost nothing except, perhaps, to someone who has known him since boyhood and knows exactly what his voice sounds like when it is working to reveal almost nothing. Robb looks at the map again. The ford is there, a thin blue line, a possible crossing. It changes the route entirely. It changes the timeline of the campaign, the position of the vanguard, the speed at which they can meet the Lannister forces before those forces expect to be met. He traces the line with one finger and says quietly that they move in the morning. They move in the morning, and the days that follow are hard ones. The kind of days that leave men thinner and quieter than they began them, stripped of whatever softness they carried from home. The road north of the river bends through dense woodland, where the light arrives late and leaves early, where the ground underfoot is never quite dry, where the sounds of an army moving through trees accumulate into a strange, constant murmur that a man can begin to hear even when it has stopped. Jon rides near the front of the column most mornings, and he does not speak much, but he writes. He writes in the evenings when the fires are built and the camp settles into its uneasy nocturnal rhythms. And he writes sometimes in the early gray of dawn, before the horns call the men back to their feet. And the letters he produces are not the brief, functional dispatches of a man maintaining an obligation. They are long. They are careful. They describe the color of the sky over the hills 2 nights past, which reminded him of something he cannot quite name, and the decision he made about the positioning of the outriders that he is still not certain was the right one, and the man in the 3rd Company who lost 2 fingers to a sword cut and bore it with a dignity that made everyone around him feel briefly better about the nature of men. He writes these things to Sansa. She writes back with the same care. Her letters arrive bundled with dispatches and supply tallies, indistinguishable from official correspondence in their outer wrapping. But inside, they are different. She tells him that Bran has taken to sitting at the high window above the great hall in the evenings, watching the road south as though watching Will itself bring the army home. She tells him that Rickon asked one of the stable hands to teach him to sharpen a blade, and that she allowed it, because a boy of his age benefits from the discipline of learning something difficult with his hands, and because she thought Jon would understand that reasoning. She tells him small things about the household, a mare that foaled unexpectedly in the lower stable, a dispute between two of the cook's assistants that required her arbitration, the way the first frost came earlier than the old men predicted and proved them humble about it. She tells him she has been reading. She tells him which books. She tells him in one letter that she found herself walking the length of the great hall late one evening and counting the banners, and that she thought about what it means to be the one who stays behind, and that she has found the answer is not what she expected. It is not smaller than going to war, only different. And she is learning its dimensions. Jon reads that particular letter 3 times before the fire and does not put it away with the others. Robb notices things. He has always noticed things about Jon in the particular way that a person notices the habits of someone they have grown alongside, not through deliberate attention, but through accumulated proximity. Years of small observations that settle into knowledge so gradual it feels like instinct. He notices the letters. He notices their frequency. He notices the way Jon finishes them with a kind of care that is different from the care Jon applies to anything else, including correspondence with Maester Luwin, including the tactical reports he drafts in his precise, considered hand. He says nothing about this for some time. He turns it over in his mind the way a commander turns over the features of unfamiliar terrain, not passing judgment, only seeking to understand what he is looking at. One night, perhaps a week after the ford crossing, they sit together beside a fire that is burned down to its practical stage, useful for warmth, but past its light, and the camp around them has gone as quiet as a camp full of soldiers ever truly goes. Robb pours from a skin of something dark and passes it across without ceremony, and they drink for a while without speaking, which is a thing they have always been able to do. Then Robb says, plainly, the way he says things when he has decided to say them, "She kept thorough records." Jon looks at the fire. "She found the ford." Robb continues, and his voice carries something careful in it, something that is not quite teasing and not quite solemn, but occupies the country between them. "In the household records, which she keeps thoroughly." "She does," Jon says. Robb turns the skin in his hands. "How long have the letters been this long?" There is a pause. Jon does not answer immediately, which is itself an answer. "I'm not asking you to account for it," Robb says. "I'm asking because I'm her brother, and because I have known you since before you could hold a sword properly, and because I think I understand what I'm looking at." The fire shifts. A log settles. Somewhere in the camp, a horse moves against its line. "If we come home from this," Robb says, and his voice drops into something quieter, something that acknowledges the weight of that conditional without flinching from it. "I can think of no better match for her. I want you to know that I would give it freely and gladly and without reservation." Jon is quiet for a long moment. Something moves across his face that he does not attempt to govern. A disbelief first, the instinct of a man who has spent his life adjusting his expectations downward, and then beneath it, slower and warmer and more certain, something else entirely. He does not speak immediately. He does not trust himself to. When he does, his voice is low and considered, and he says that Sansa's own choice stands above all others in this, that whatever he hopes is secondary to what she herself would choose when she's been asked clearly and plainly by someone who will accept any answer she gives. Robb looks at him across the fire for a long moment. Then he nods, once, with a satisfaction that carries more weight than any elaborate speech could have. "I know," he says. "That's why I told you." The fire burns lower. The camp breathes around them in the dark, and somewhere in a courier's saddlebag, making its way north along the road toward Winterfell, there is a letter that Jon sealed earlier that evening, longer than usual, even for him. Its final lines written and then partially rewritten, the wax pressed with more deliberateness than the task strictly required. The letter arrives at Winterfell on a gray morning, carried by a rider whose horse has been pushed hard through 3 days of cold roads and river crossings. Sansa reads it twice in the solar, once quickly and then again slowly, the second reading a different thing entirely from the first. The handwriting is Jon's, careful in its construction, the letters slightly compressed in the way they always are when he has thought long about what he is setting down. She folds it when she is done and holds it for a moment before placing it in the cedar box where she keeps correspondence that matters, and she does not examine too closely why she makes that distinction. What if the war had turned on something as small as the sending of a letter? What if the entire course of House Stark's survival rested not on armies or alliances or the sharp edge of Valyrian steel, but on the quiet, persistent discipline of a man who wrote carefully and thought before he acted? History is not always made in the moments that announce themselves. Sometimes it is made in the pauses, in the reconsidering, in the choice not to act when action would have felt righteous and satisfying and catastrophically wrong. Robb Stark does not marry Jane Westerling. That is the fact around which everything else turns, the fixed point from which the altered world radiates outward. He comes close, closer than Jon ever fully knows, because Robb is 20 years old and grieving, and the girl is kind and present in a way that cuts through even the most strategic thinking. But Jon is there. That is the difference. Jon rides alongside him in the weeks after the fall of Winterfell. The false fall? Theon's betrayal. The news that arrives like a blade to the chest. And when Robb's grief threatens to curdle into the kind of desperate recklessness that destroys men and kingdoms alike, Jon sits with him in silence until the silence becomes something that can be spoken into. He does not lecture. He does not strategize aloud in the moments when Robb needs something else entirely. He simply remains present with a steadiness that his brother finds over time indispensable. And then, when the moment is right, he speaks plainly. The Freys are watching. Walder Frey is a man who nurses every slight like a wound that will not close, a man who has spent decades calculating what he is owed and finding the sum perpetually insufficient. The promise made to him was a bridge. Bridges, Jon says quietly, can hold the weight of an army, or they can be cut at the moment they are most needed. It depends entirely on whether the man who controls the crossing believes the debt has been honored. Robb listens. That is the other difference, the one that cannot be overstated. He listens because Jon has always been the one voice in his life that carries no ambition for itself, no agenda beyond the thing being discussed. Robb is surrounded by men who want something, even the loyal ones, even the good ones. Jon wants only for the campaign to succeed and for his brother to survive it. That purity of intention registers in some deep part of Robb's instincts, and so, when Jon speaks of the phrase, Robb does not dismiss the council as overcaution. He sends the appropriate delegation. He makes the appropriate assurances. He does not give Walder Frey everything the old man wants. That would be its own kind of weakness, and Robb understands this. But he gives him enough that the bridge remains standing, that the slight never accumulates to the particular pitch of fury that once led to bloodshed and horror at a feast meant to seal an alliance. Rose Bolton is a more careful calculation. Jon has never trusted the man. He has said so once, precisely once, in language that was measured and specific rather than instinctive. Listing the behaviors, the patterns, the quality of Bolton's silences in council that suggest a man who is always computing rather than committing. Robb weighs this against Bolton's undeniable usefulness, his soldiers, his knowledge of the terrain north of the Neck. He does not dismiss Bolton, but he watches him more carefully than he might have, and that watching means certain conversations never happen, certain correspondences never travel south toward Lannister gold, certain betrayals never fully take shape because the ground they required was never left unguarded. The war remains brutal. It does not simplify because Jon is present. It does not become a clean or easy thing. Men die. Ground is taken and lost and taken again. There are nights in the camp when the losses accumulate to a weight that neither brother can speak around, when they sit together without much conversation and the fire does all the talking. But the young wolf survives the campaign season. His kingdom does not fracture at the seam. And in the deep winter, when a ceasefire settles over the contested territories like snow over a battlefield, Robb sends Jon north. Jon rides for Winterfell with a small company. His stated purpose: the review of supply chains and defensive preparations along the northern roads. His actual purpose: something less easily categorized and more important than either of those things. Sansa has been managing the castle with a competence that has impressed even the oldest members of the household staff, and there are decisions that require the kind of authority that exists in person rather than in letters. He arrives at dusk. The gates open, and the courtyard fills briefly with the controlled activity of a garrison receiving its commander's return. And then the activity settles, and he is standing in Winterfell's great yard with the cold of it rising from the stones and the torchlight pressing back the dark. Sansa comes down from the Great Hall steps to meet him, and for a moment, just a moment, neither of them speaks. The formality they have both been carrying in their correspondence, that careful architecture of appropriately diplomatic distance, does not survive the actuality of being in the same space. It simply isn't there. What is there instead is something that has been building through every letter, every piece of counsel given and received, every strategic exchange that gradually became something more honest than strategy. She tells him the grain stores in the eastern granary are lower than she had indicated in her last report, that she had not wanted to alarm the council unnecessarily, but that he should know the true figure. He tells her she was right to manage the information the way she did, that information released at the wrong moment can create the panic it is meant to prevent. She nods, and then she says, quietly, that she is glad he is here. He looks at her across the torchlit yard, and the words he might have chosen, the careful, considered language that has always served as his primary mode of self-protection, does not come. What comes instead is something simpler. He says that he is glad too, that he has been for some time now. Somewhere above them, in the solar where she works most evenings, the cedar box sits on its shelf, and in the morning there will be grain tallies and defensive assessments and the long practical labor of keeping a castle functioning through a northern winter. But that is the morning. The Godswood is quiet in the way that only old places can be quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something older than sound, something that sits beneath the wind and the creak of weirwood branches and makes itself felt in the chest rather than the ear. Jon walks the familiar path 3 evenings after the conversation in the torchlit yard, and he walks it alone at first, needing to be certain of the ground before he asks her to stand on it with him. The heart tree watches him approach. Its carved face is neither welcoming nor hostile. It simply sees, as it has always seen, as it will continue to see long after every name spoken beneath it has dissolved back into the cold northern earth. He has rehearsed nothing. He has decided this deliberately. Every rehearsed thing he has ever said to Sansa Stark has arrived slightly wrong, polished to a smoothness that she can hear and that puts a kind of glass between them. He does not want glass between them. Not tonight. She comes when he asks her. He finds her in the corridor outside the solar at the close of the working day, the cedar box already locked, the candles already snuffed, and he says only that he would like her to walk with him if she is willing, and she looks at him with those clear gray Tully eyes that are somehow more stark than Tully, and she says yes without asking where. She already knows where. She has perhaps always known that this conversation would eventually find its proper location, which is the one place in Winterfell where no strategy is sufficient armor, where the old gods press close enough to make pretense feel like desecration. They walk without speaking until they reach the heart tree. The red leaves are almost all gone now, winter having taken most of them, and what remains clings to the pale branches in isolated clusters, dark as old blood against the white wood. The pool at the tree's roots is still, its surface holding the last pale light of a sky moving from gray into black. Jon stands beside it, and Sansa stands beside him, and neither of them speaks for a long moment. He tells her then that he will not ask her anything she does not freely want. He says it plainly without preamble because he has decided that the one thing he owes her above all others is the absence of manipulation. He has watched her navigate enough manipulation in her life to know what it costs. He tells her that she owes him nothing for whatever care he has brought to Winterfell, that whatever he has done here, he has done because this is his home, and these are his people, and because it was right, not as a debt instrument for her to feel obligated to repay. He does not finish the thought immediately. He does not need to. She knows what he is edging toward, and she lets him edge toward it, watching him with an expression that is not closed and is not entirely open, that sits in the particular register she has learned to occupy, present, attentive, uncommitted, until she has heard everything. He tells her that he has come to know her in a way he did not expect. Not the Sansa who left Winterfell as a girl full of songs and romantic illusions that the world then systematically destroyed, and not the Sansa who returned, careful and armored and harder in the places where she had been wounded, but the Sansa who is becoming something else entirely, someone who balances the grain accounts and reads the ravens and manages the information that flows through this castle with a steadiness and precision that he genuinely respects. He says that word deliberately, respects, not admires from a distance, not feels tenderly toward, respects as one respects a mind that works well in conditions designed to make good thinking difficult. Sansa is quiet for a moment after he stops speaking. The wind moves through the godswood around them. Then she turns to face him, and when she speaks, she does so in the voice she uses when she has already decided something and is simply now communicating the decision. Calm, clear, without the upward inflection of uncertainty. She tells him that she does not choose him out of duty. She has thought about this carefully, she says, over months of evenings when the cedar box was locked and the candles were snuffed, and she sat with her own thoughts in the quiet dark of her chamber. asking herself the hard questions, the ones her younger self would never have known to ask. She has asked herself whether what she feels is gratitude, and whether gratitude has simply dressed itself in warmer clothes than it is entitled to wear. She has examined it the way she now examines supply reports, looking for the places where the numbers flatter rather than reveal. She tells him the numbers are honest. She tells him she loves him. Not the Jon of some hopeful invention, not a Jon fitted to any song or story, but this one. This specific, contained, quietly struggling man who stands beside a Hartree pool in the cold and tells her she owes him nothing. That one, she says. That is the one she means. Jon Snow has very little practice receiving things he wants without suspicion. He receives this with difficulty and with complete stillness, as though moving might somehow cause it to recede. The wedding takes place 3 days later in the same godswood, at the same heart tree, beneath a sky that is iron gray and spitting thin flurries of snow that catch in Sansa's hair. Robb stands to Jon's left, his expression controlled and warm in equal measure, because Robb Stark is a man who has learned to hold complexity without letting it fracture him. Arya stands to Sansa's right in her goodwool cloak, and she is not smiling exactly, but there is something in her posture that has released. Some long-held vigilance set down for the morning. Bran is there, brought on his chair to the edge of the pool, and his eyes during the ceremony are focused somewhere beyond the gathering in a way that no one entirely questions anymore. The Northern Lords witness it. Not all of them. There was no time and no desire for spectacle, but enough. Enough that by nightfall, ravens will carry the words south and east and west, and those who have been watching Winterfell and calculating its vulnerabilities will need to recalculate. A Stark by blood and a Stark by bond. The North united in something older and harder than an alliance of convenience. Jon speaks the words of the old ceremony, and Sansa speaks them back to him. And when it is done, the Hartree's carved face looks on as it has looked on everything for 1,000 years, neither blessing nor condemning, simply witnessing. There is no feast. There will be one later, Robb says, when the winter allows for it, when the granaries can support the weight of celebration. For now they return inside, all of them, shaking snow from their cloaks in the great hall, and Arya says something sharp and sideways to Jon that makes him laugh. Actually laugh the way he rarely does. And Sansa watches this and says nothing, but her expression is the one she wears when the numbers in the ledger come out exactly as they should. What none of them yet know, as the small fire in the great hearth sends its warmth across the stone floor, is that one of the ravens dispatched at the close of day does not carry word of the wedding. It carries a question sent south by a Maester whose loyalties have never been fully mapped, addressed to a house whose interest in Winterfell has never been fully explained. The question is simple. It asks whether the information is confirmed. And somewhere south of the neck, in a chamber that smells of candle wax and old correspondence, someone who has been waiting a long time reads the message and then sits very still for a very long time before calling for ink. The rider comes 3 days later, not from the south, but from the west, threading through the wolfswood on a horse that has been pushed hard and rested poorly. He arrives at the gates of Winterfell in the last gray hour before full dark, cloaked against the cold, his face weathered in the particular way of men who spend their lives close to marshland and open water. The guards at the gate do not recognize him at first, and there is a moment of held breath and hands near hilts before he gives his name. Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch, the man who stood beside Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy and walked away breathing when others did not. He is brought in without delay. Jon receives him in the solar, not the Great Hall. This is a deliberate choice, made quickly and instinctively, the kind of choice that Sansa has watched Jon learn to make without being taught. Small rooms for serious things, public spaces for what can be made public. Sansa is present because Jon does not ask her to leave. He does not need to deliberate on this. She sits slightly behind him and to his right, the way she often does when she is choosing to be a witness rather than a participant. And that distinction, small as it seems, is its own form of strategy. Howland Reed does not waste time. He is old enough to understand that some burdens become heavier the longer they are carried, and he has carried this one since before Jon Snow could walk. He places a document on the table, then a second. Then, after a pause that feels like a door being opened in a very old wall, he speaks of what he saw, of Lyanna, of Rhaegar, of a name spoken above a newborn in a dying woman's voice, quiet enough that only those standing very close could hear it at all. Jon does not speak for a long time after Howland Reed finishes. His hand rests flat on the parchment without quite touching it, the way a man might hold still near a flame he is not yet certain will burn him. His face does something complicated, not grief, not quite, but something adjacent to it. A loosening, perhaps, of something that has been braced against a blow for years without knowing what shape the blow would take. He does not read the document immediately. He looks at the fire instead. It is Sansa who reaches forward and draws the parchment toward them both. She reads it carefully. She reads it the way she reads everything now, not for the surface of it, but for what it confirms or contradicts, for what it was designed to say, and what it admits only by accident. She had known her father kept silences the way other men kept gold, carefully, deliberately, for specific purposes. She had not known, not precisely, but she had known the shape of the not knowing. The careful redirections whenever Jon's parentage drifted near the edges of conversation, the way Ned Stark's face had always changed when he looked at Jon, something deeper than love, something that carried weight like obligation, like debt, like a vow made to the dead. She sets the document down. She looks at Jon. He is still looking at the fire. She says it plainly, because plainly is the only honest way to say it. She tells him she believes it to be true. The words fall into the room, like stones into still water. Jon's first answer is no, not a considered no, not a political no, but an instinctive one, the kind that comes from somewhere below argument, from the part of him that grew up in this castle under another name, that learned to hold a sword in this yard, that carried the Stark name like a wound he had made his own. His hands close on the edge of the table. He does not finish whatever thought begins behind his eyes. He does not need to. What follows is not an argument. It is something quieter and more significant than that. Sansa does not push. She waits, because she understands that some realizations have to be arrived at rather than delivered. And Jon arrives at it himself, in his own time, sitting in a room where the fire is low, and the man who watched his mother die is still standing near the door with the patience of someone who has long since made his peace with the weight of secrets. When Jon speaks again, his voice is steady. He says he does not want a throne. He says it without drama, without performance, with the particular flatness of a man who is speaking an absolute truth, and is mildly surprised by how uncomplicated it feels. Whatever blood runs in his veins, Whatever name was whispered in a tower at the edge of Dorne. He is a Stark. He is of Winterfell. He is Sansa's husband, and the North is his purpose, and the Iron Throne is a seat that has broken better men than him. Sansa listens to this, and then tells him that the truth of his blood, now that it is known to them, will need to be managed. Not denied, not announced. Managed. It is a tool, she says, and a tool is most useful when its wielder chooses the moment of its use. Howland Reed watches both of them from the doorway with an expression that is difficult to read. But he makes no move to leave, and on the table between Jon and Sansa, the second document, the one neither of them has yet opened, waits. The warnings come in fragments, the way catastrophe always does. A ranger, half mad from cold, and something worse than cold, stumbles through a village gate south of the wall and speaks of shapes in the darkness that do not stop when struck by steel. A band of free folk, Thens, traditionally proud to the point of silence, arrive at northern holds with their children pressed close and their eyes hollowed by something they refuse to name aloud but cannot stop seeing in their sleep. Letters reach Winterfell from the Night's Watch in diminishing frequency, and then the letters stop altogether, and the silence where they had been is louder than any warning. Jon reads every account. He reads them once for shock, and then again for detail, and then a third time with Maester Luwin's older texts spread open beside them, cross-referencing, searching for the shape of what is coming beneath the terror of how it is being described. He has spent years in this work, not because anyone asked him to, but because the North has always felt to him like something that required knowing deeply, the way a man knows the weight and balance of a weapon he intends to carry into battle. And so when the testimonies arrive and others read them as hysteria, Jon reads them as data. He recognizes the pattern. He knows what the old words mean. He knows what the long night was, and he understands with a cold and clarifying certainty that settles over him like the first frost of autumn, that it is returning. Convincing Robb requires more than certainty. Robb is a man of practical warfare, of armies that can be counted and terrain that can be mapped. And what Jon is describing to him in the Great Hall of Winterfell, beneath the banners and the stone faces of their ancestors, is something that exists outside the logic Robb has built his understanding of war upon. Jon does not appeal to his fear. He appeals to Robb's intelligence, which is considerable when it is not being outpaced by his pride. He lays the testimonies out in sequence. He shows him where they corroborate each other across distances too great for collusion. He places Luwin's texts beside the Night's Watch records and draws the line between them with a patience that is itself a kind of argument. Robb listens. He is quiet for a long time, and then he says, simply, that they will need the Northern Lords. The gathering that follows is not easy. Lords who have spent generations viewing the Wall as a permanent and sufficient solution to whatever exists beyond it do not readily accept the premise that the Wall is no longer sufficient. There is skepticism voiced loudly, and disbelief dressed as pragmatism, and more than one suggestion that the witnesses have been lying or dreaming or both. Jon lets them speak. He does not argue against their doubt in the moment it is expressed. Instead, he waits, and when they have exhausted their objections, he presents the evidence again, and then he asks them a single question. He asks them what they are prepared to lose if they are wrong. The room grows quieter after that, quieter in the particular way of men who have done the calculation and disliked the answer. Sansa's contribution to what follows is not visible in any grand speech or dramatic confrontation, but it is foundational. While Jon builds the military coalition, drawing in free folk leaders through a combination of respect and reciprocity that his years of listening to their testimonies has earned him? Sansa turns her attention to the castle and the land surrounding it with the same systematic rigor she has applied to every resource challenge Winterfell has ever placed before her. She calculates grain stores against projected population influxes. She maps the castle's defensive architecture against the specific tactical problems that an enemy unconstrained by cold or fatigue would present. She organizes Winterfell's great fires and its dragonglass supply, procured through channels Jon established years earlier after reading accounts of what ends the dead, with the precision of someone who understands that logistics is not the support structure of war, but its spine. The long night arrives as darkness always does, gradually and then all at once. The dead come south in a wave that is less an army than a tide, and the terror of facing them is not something that preparation fully neutralizes. Men who trained for this moment still feel the wrongness of it deep in their bodies. The ancient animal panic of facing something that should not exist. But they hold. They hold because there is a line of command that does not fracture under pressure. They hold because the fires Sansa ordered, built and maintained, are precisely where they need to be. They hold because Jon has organized the Free Folk alongside the Northmen in a coalition that functions, imperfectly but functionally, as a single force, rather than rival factions sharing a battlefield. Arya moves through the fighting like something the darkness itself did not anticipate. She has always been most dangerous when she is underestimated, and the dead do not estimate at all, which makes them, in this singular way, vulnerable to her. She knows every shadow of Winterfell's walls, every corridor and courtyard and narrow passage where speed matters more than strength. She has been preparing for this too in her own way, which is to say, she has never stopped preparing for anything since the day Winterfell first taught her that the world was not safe. The Night King moves through the battle with the ancient patience of something that has waited thousands of years and does not conceive of defeat. And then he sees Jon, and Jon sees him, and the distance between them begins, slowly and with great weight, to close. The distance closes. It closes because it must, because everything in the long arc of this story has been pulling toward this single point of convergence. Two figures on a frozen battlefield, one ancient beyond reckoning, one young and stubborn and refusing to be anything other than what he is. What happens between them in those final moments belongs to the realm of fire and old magic, to the last desperate arithmetic of a war that has been fought and lost and fought again across uncountable centuries. It belongs to the choices Jon Snow made years before this night, the choice to stay, to build, to love something worth defending, rather than to wander in search of a cause he could not name. He does not fight alone. He has never fought alone. And when the Night King falls, and the cold begins its long retreat, and the dead simply stop, it is not one man's victory. It is the North's. It is Winterfell's. It belongs to every fire that burned through those terrible hours, because Sansa Stark understood that warmth is not a comfort. It is a weapon. The silence that follows is the deepest kind, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something enormous, finally finished. Spring does not arrive immediately. It does not arrive in days or even in weeks. Winter does not release its grip on the world with any kind of grace. It retreats the way old power retreats, slowly, grudgingly, surrendering ground one pale morning at a time. But the dead are still. The wall, what remains of it, stands witness to an absence rather than a presence. And the living, the ones who endured the long night and came through its far side, blinking and unsteady, begin the slow and necessary work of understanding what they have survived. The great lords gather at Winterfell because there is nowhere else to gather. King's Landing is distant and fractured, its politics suddenly small and strange against the scale of what the North has just absorbed on behalf of the entire world. The surviving houses come, some humbled, some reluctant, all of them carrying the particular exhaustion of people who have stared into something absolute and found it was real. They come to Winterfell's Great Hall, and Winterfell receives them. The castle is scarred. Its stones remember what happened in its courtyards and on its walls. But it stands. It has always stood. The council is not a comfortable affair. Truth rarely is, and the truth that moves through the room like a current beneath still water is the truth of Jon's blood, the Targaryen name, the Stark face, the silver thread of lineage that connects him to a dynasty the realm thought it had finished with. It surfaces the way all buried things eventually surface, with a weight that silences every other conversation in the room. The great lords look at him differently in that moment, some with calculation, some with the old fear that Targaryen names reliably produce, some with something more complicated. The recognition that this man stood in the path of the long night and chose the North over every other thing, which makes the question of his blood feel, to anyone paying close attention, like the least interesting thing about him. Sansa stands beside him. She does not step back, and she does not look away from the room. She has been standing in rooms full of dangerous people since she was a girl, and she has learned exactly what it costs to appear unafraid, and she has learned that the cost is worth it. Jon speaks, and his voice is steady in the way that earned him the loyalty of men who do not give their loyalty easily. He does not want the Iron Throne. He does not frame it as sacrifice or as magnanimity. He frames it as what it is, a choice, clear-eyed and permanent, made on behalf of the people he has spent his life among. He renounces the claim completely, irrevocably, in terms that leave no seam for ambiguity to slip through. He names Robb Stark as King in the North and Lord of an independent kingdom, and he says it with the full weight of his voice and his history and the blood he has already shed for that frozen ground. The Northern Lords do not cheer immediately. They do something quieter and more lasting. They look at each other, and then they look back at Jon, and something settles in the room that has nothing to do with noise. Loyalty, when it is the real kind, does not announce itself. It simply takes root. What follows is the long, unglamorous, essential work of rebuilding. Robb governs with the particular seriousness of a man who has seen the consequences of failure and carries them with him as a permanent reminder. The North begins slowly to breathe again. The living have inherited something immense and fragile, and they tend to it accordingly. And on an evening when the cold still lingers, but no longer bites the way it once did, when the godswood holds a particular kind of hush that feels chosen rather than accidental, Jon and Sansa sit beneath the heart tree. Their daughter sleeps across his lap, her small weight grounding and real and extraordinary. Arya sits close by, working a blade with the patient focus of someone who sharpens things not out of urgency, but out of habit, out of love for the ritual of being ready. Bran watches the snowfall with eyes that see more than snow, that see the long weave of the story beneath the story, the roots that reach back through every choice that brought them all to this quiet moment. And from the great hall, warmly lit and alive with voices, Robb's laugh carries through the cold air, unguarded and full and entirely itself. The heart tree watches over all of them with its carved face, ancient and patient, as the first pale suggestion of spring begins, almost imperceptibly, to soften the dark edge of the northern sky. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.